Welcome to SB&M is Here, the State Bar of New Mexico's official podcast. In this series, we'll discuss topics such as professional development, tools of the legal trade, and mental and professional well-being. Connecting the legal community across New Mexico, SB&M is here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to SB&M is Here. This is Morgan Pettit, Member Services Manager and Podcast Producer. We are back with the Cannabis Law section. In what should have been perhaps an unsurprising fact, the first cannabis episode that we released in April of 2021 was the most popular episode of the SB&M is Here series thus far. It had over 3,000 unique listens between all of the various listening platforms. So if you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend doing so. Even if you listen to it way after April 2021, it's still pretty relevant. They outline the basics of the legalization bill, and they have a really thoughtful Q&A session that I think will be helpful to anybody who's curious now that we're still in the infancy of recreational legalization in the state of New Mexico. But for this episode, we are honored to have Diana Trujillo, who is the Superintendent of the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department. Superintendent Trujillo is a licensed attorney and also a House representative for our state. Patricia, Monaghan, the 2021 Cannabis Chair-elect, hosts our episode with questions directly from our Cannabis section members. So tune in to hear about an overview of the implementation thus far, the status of online manufacturing applications, a little bit about the projected budget for licensing, and future plans on working with the legislature to support this new and growing industry for our state. As a quick side note, as of this recording, there are a few decisions still to be made or finalized that are discussed between Superintendent Trujillo and Tricia. So to see the status of these decisions or any decisions, please visit the Cannabis Controls Division's website to sign up for the latest news and keep appraised of the new information as it's being released. That website is www.rld.nm.gov. With that, Tricia, take it away.
Thank you, Morgan, for your introduction. I'd also like to welcome and enthusiastically thank you, Superintendent Trujillo, for agreeing to participate in this podcast interview with the State Bar of New Mexico Cannabis Law section. For your tremendous success is already accomplished in briskly executing the Cannabis Regulation Act. We really appreciate your work. The Cannabis Law section solicited questions from members, which I'll address later. But prior to me asking you any questions, could you please provide a summary of the status of the Cannabis Control Division, current forecasts, and any plans?
Thank you. I really appreciate being on here, Tricia. This is really an honor. And, you know, one of our goals when the law first passed was to try to make sure that the public had access to information. As you can imagine, this has been a really we started getting calls from folks the day after the bill passed in the Senate and realized how important it was for us to get a website up so that we could share information that seemed to be kind of common amongst those who were asking us questions. So we did. We got a website up the day after the Senate voted to pass the bill, and that was well before the governor even signed it, and have continued to add to that ever since. It is incredibly important to us that we're open and transparent in the things that we do. This has been an industry that, you know, from the very beginning, this war on drugs has really harmed the community. It's harmed our country, and our goal is to try to reel that back as much as we can, and that requires that kind of open and transparent. So, you know, when the Cannabis Regulation Act was passed, it required the Regulation and Licensing Department to really implement this comprehensive licensing, compliance for cannabis producers, cannabis manufacturers, cannabis consumption, retail. There's quite a list of license types that we're required to implement. The first of which had to be accomplished by September 1st, which, if you're familiar with rulemaking, was a really tight deadline. Mm-hmm. So before the responsibilities even came to the department, we were already in the process of drafting rules for the producers. In doing that, we met with currently licensed LNPPs, which is the licensed nonprofit producers under the Department of Health. We did some tours of some facilities. We brought together all the licensees in a big podcast and had an opportunity to ask them questions, to hear from them, and then draft the rules. We looked at what other states are doing. We met with Washington, we met with Colorado, we met with New York, we met with a national organization called CANRA, which is limited to just cannabis regulators around the country. We just recently joined that group, CANRA, within the last month, and are pretty excited about the support that we get from them. So those rules went out. We got so much public comment back that we recognized we were going to have to go back out again because we're going to have to change them pretty dramatically. And they weren't going to be what's considered a logical outgrowth of what we had drafted and proposed. So we went out for another rule hearing, and those rules were adopted, I believe, on August 28th or 24th, and went into effect. And that gave us the ability to meet our September 1 deadline to begin issuing and processing cannabis producer licenses. So right now, you can apply for a cannabis producer or a cannabis micro producer. At the same time, kind of parallel to that, we got the CRAC committee up and running. I know some folks refer to it as the crack committee. That seems inappropriate to us. And so we creatively, our new deputy, Robbie Sachs, came up with, let's call it CRAC. So that's what we refer to it as. That committee started meeting, and they looked at the first rules that were proposed, and they made some recommendations that they believed there was a couple of changes they asked for, and those were ultimately adopted. So the CRAC committee is up and running, and our next responsibility is to do all of the other license types by January 1st. We did a little bit of research after we kind of got the producer rules off of our plate. We did some research and recognized that the manufacturing was a really dangerous profession. There was individuals that were seriously hurt here in Santa Fe, and there were stories of that around the country. And so we quickly got some draft manufacturing rules that were kind of best practices from around the country, from those states that we met with, from states that we were able to get their rules from and do some comparison. And the CRAC committee agreed with us, and so we adopt those on an emergency basis. They went into effect immediately upon our filing them. And now we're in the process of going out for the public hearing, because those emergency rules are only valid for 180 days. So you have to go out for a regular hearing. Those are out for public comment right now and include retail and courier. So we have a hearing for that scheduled for October 28th, and we hope that we'll be able to adopt those rules shortly thereafter. So far, we've only gotten a couple of public comments from that. I looked at them last night to kind of see where we were at on that. One of them had a really good comment about we weren't allowing couriers to collect money. And lo and behold, and we learn new things all the time, but the statute actually says that couriers can collect money. So that will be taken out. Another comment was about something in the THC value or the amount of THC, and they read it as no more than, and it's actually no less than. So we take really seriously the comments that people send in to us for these rules. And that's kind of where we're at on that. We think that the manufacturing, we're in the process of developing the online application, because that's been a really big thing for us, is to roll out the application process as an online platform instead of the paper and pen that has been used in the past. So the manufacturing application is in draft form. We're reviewing the screenshots to make sure that the words and the rules actually match. And that should be going live here within the next couple of weeks, even before the final manufacturing rules. We'll base it off of the emergency manufacturing. And then shortly thereafter that, it's our intent to do the retail licensing. The courier licensing will probably come after that because you actually have to have a retail establishment before you can have somebody curry out to someone. So that's kind of the trajectory of how we plan to do those rules. Shortly thereafter, we'll look at the cannabis consumption areas and the server permits, which again, the server permits we have to have done by January, but until you've got consumption areas licensed, the server permit is not, that's the only place that the server permit is required, is in a cannabis consumption area. So that's kind of where we're at right now, Tricia, and we're just continuing to build this plane as we fly it.
Well, again, I want to thank you. And I commented when we first went on that I noticed immediately that the web went live before the governor even signed the bill, and was extremely impressed with that. And early on, I attended virtual meeting where you were there. It was a Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, I think. And you were so open and answering responses. And I participated in the comments on the regs, and they were listened to. They changed. I mean, the provisional license, that was a biggie, but that changed. So, I mean, I think you're walking your talk. So thank you again. And now I'll get into some questions. Some of the questions you already answered, but maybe we'll just repeat them. In terms of the resources and references, you talked about what resources and references materials did the Cannabis Control Division use in drafting existing regulations, and what will it use for future regulations? I mean, you had talked about that, but you might go ahead and repeat.
Yeah, we actually have, we have to put all of the reference material that we use on the website along with our draft proposed rules. And so we've used reference material, honestly, from all of the states that we can get them from. Every state, because this isn't a federally functioning, there's no guidelines from the federal level. Each state is kind of developing their own. And so best practices are kind of slow in the coming. But what we did is we looked at Washington, we looked at Oregon, we looked at Nevada, we looked at California. I've taken a lot of information from the state of Maine, because they have this really cool program where it's a cannabis nursery. I think we're ultimately going to ask the legislature to create a license type for that. But in the meantime, we're trying to get it into the retail establishment so that they can sell actual cannabis plants. I'm not sure whether that'll work. We're a little shaky on whether we have authority for that, but we've literally taken rules from around the country. We met with the Department of Health pretty extensively prior to the June 29th when we took over the licensing for the Lynn and Aaron Compassionate Use Act and the Cannabis Regulation Act. But we're using material that's provided to us from current licensees, from the public. The comments on the first round of producer rules that we put out were amazing. They were amazing. The Secchia Association gave us a booklet. They gave us some really comprehensive written material. So we take material from wherever we can get it. Honestly, if someone would have said to me a year ago or even 9 months ago that I was going to be implementing cannabis for the state of New Mexico, and I don't mean me personally, because I've got an amazing team of folks that really are working hard every day. But if I heard that I was going to be a part of that, I would have told the person that said it that they just don't know me. Because I didn't know anything about cannabis. And the biggest problem has been we don't know what we don't know. And that's when you can be the most dangerous, I think. And so we're like sponges. We literally have been, getting resources from wherever we can, from the experts, from those who are impacted, and trying to make some sense out of it so that it works for this really incredibly new industry in New Mexico.
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job with that too. And I've even referred clients to the resources that are online, because there's some good, analytical data there where consultants have been, and you know, from economists, et cetera, and the demand in New Mexico. And so, no, I think there is really good information there, valuable. Let's see, some of the other questions we've really already answered in terms of where we are with regulations. And which one? Right now, it's only the producer license and either micro producer or full producer.
That's correct. And the application that we have online actually gives those producers and micro producers an opportunity to check a box that they intend to become either a vertically integrated cannabis establishment or an integrated cannabis micro business. And what we'll do is we'll take the fees that they're paying right now for just that one license type. And when we have the other license types available, the manufacturing, the retail, and the courier, and they want to increase their business and become that vertically integrated, we'll apply just for this first year. We'll apply that fee that they paid towards their full fee for the vertically integrated. So we're trying to be adaptable, recognizing that, right, we couldn't roll it all out at the same time. And we don't want folks to be, you know, impacted in a financial manner because we didn't have all of the license types available.
No, it seems to be working well. I mean, that makes sense because it's being applied. Because I even talked to Robert Sachs about that for a micro license, if they're applying for a micro license and they pay $1,000, well, then that's the fee for two for integrated. And he said that's correct. So then if they apply for a manufacturer's license, there essentially wouldn't be a fee for that.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So the Cannabis Control Division is given 90 days to approve or deny a license application. And applicants are asking how long they can expect to get an approval or denial of their applicants.
Yeah, that's a really important question. And this is the thing, is we've got 90 days to approve or deny a completed application. As of just a couple of days ago, and I didn't have time to check it this morning, but we had over 1,500 licenses initiated, only initiated. As of last night, there was like 83 that were actually submitted. Out of those licenses that were submitted, yeah, it's really small. It's a very, and so.
Well, see, I misunderstood that. I had heard that it was 1,500 the applications were submitted, so that there were 1,500 applications. So these are just people that have gone on and started it. Oh, that's
right.
Completely different.
Yeah, no, that's.
So there's only been 83 that have full applications that have been fully submitted, both micro and full.
Well, and this is the other side of that, though, is that those ones that were submitted completely, like they hit the submit button because they've attested to everything. We're up to the 71. So I just been looking at it right now. There's 85 licenses that have actually been fully submitted. That does not mean that they're complete.
Right.
So our staff has gone on. Yesterday, they were all the way up to application 71, and there were none of them that were complete. They didn't have their actual business licenses.
Right, because I know some they can't get their business license until they get the cannabis. So it's
correct.
Chicken egg.
That's exactly right. And that's why we came up with that provisional letter so that you can take it back to your local jurisdiction. In some cases, they don't have their lease fully signed yet because they're looking for that provisional approval for most of the stuff before they, kind of sign on that dotted line. And so out of all of those, at this moment, I can tell you that we think there may be one application that may have submitted everything yesterday. We're in the process of reviewing that today, and we'll notify that licensee as to whether or not their application is complete. And upon it being complete, it's our expectation that we're not going to be waiting 90 days. We're gonna try to get those popped out there and get those issued so that people can start their business. We're dedicating as much staffing as we can. I've even reviewed applications and just so that I can get a feel for what the process is like, because we meet on a weekly basis to talk about any things that may have come up, like, oh, we saw this and how are we going to deal with that? Our staff meets on a weekly basis to discuss those things and to problem solve. So out of those 85, I can tell you that there's potentially one, and we hope to get that taken care of within the next 24 to 48 hours.
Oh, good, good. That's interesting. Well, I'm glad you clarified that because I kept hearing, 1,500 applications, and I thought, whoa, whoa. But that's more reasonable because I know the last time licenses were issued in 2015, I think it was open for about 120 days. There were only 84, I think, applications submitted, but that's when it was 750 to 1,000 pages in a notebook you had to carry up to Santa Fe.
And not even one notebook. I've seen those notebooks,
Right.
and I've seen they're like 3 to 5 notebooks that are
Yeah.
like 3 inches to 5 inches thick, which is
Yes.
why we went online, tried to reduce the application process to the minimal. A lot of the
Yes.
questions are just certifications that you have information. And then when we go out and do, compliance inspections, then we'll look at those things and make sure that you actually do have them on your site, like policies and those
Right.
kinds of. So yeah, but we're looking that we can get these applications really approved in an incredibly timely manner. That's our goal.
That's admirable. It's good. So does a position remain, because I know I've heard that repeated too, the Cannabis Control Division, that if an applicant satisfies all the application requirements, they will be issued a cannabis license?
Yeah, if they satisfy the requirements, then it's our responsibility to issue them a license. Now, just because you've satisfied, a requirement, doesn't mean that it's satisfied for approval. And let me try to explain that. If you've submitted a water right, you could probably say that you've satisfied that requirement, but we have to double check that with the state engineer. And maybe, like, let me just give you an example of not someone who was doing a water right, but someone who was trying to show that they had access to water from a local jurisdiction, like a water municipality, a water, I should know what they're called, but like your local water, where you get your city water, your municipal water from. And what they had submitted was a bill, a utility bill. Well, that makes a lot of sense, right? And we recognize, like, we probably need to be a little more specific about what kind of documentation you have to provide. But a bill was not adequate for us. And so they at least met that they had provided documentation, but it wasn't appropriate documentation.
Right.
And so satisfying and satisfying it to the level that you're required to for licensing can sometimes be a little bit different. But if you complete and you provide all of the information, we will issue a license. There's no limit on how many licenses we can issue, and there's no small window either. And I think that's honestly why so many people went online and started an application, because they wanted to get in line. And I wish I had the numbers today, but our IT folks are getting us numbers. How many people are looky-loos, just came on and created a username and a password?
Right.
How many people did part of the application?
I'm one.
There you go.
I did it.
That's right. I know they're out there.
Because I wanted to see the applications.
That's exactly right. And so and then how many people started the application thinking that they're applying for a retail?
Right.
And they realized the only 2 questions were producer. And they stopped at that point until we have that option. So I should have those numbers. He thought we might have them by the end of this week so that I can speak a little more reasonable, because I think people hear that 1,500 and they're like, oh my gosh. But that's not what's happening.
And that's I'm glad to hear that, because that's a good clarification, because that's exactly what everybody's been thinking. I mean, I've heard it repeatedly. I thought it too. So that's good. And you said there's no limit on the licenses. That people keep asking that too, and I keep saying that's no limit, no limit.
Nope.
Now you talked about looking at Washington and other states, Oregon. Have you, the Regulation License Department, the Cannabis Control Division, taken the oversupply and business failures that occurred in Washington and Oregon into consideration for New Mexico?
No, we did talk about that. We've talked about what's happened in Washington. We've talked about what's happened in Oregon. We've talked about what's happened in Oklahoma. And quite honestly, it's happened in every state that's started selling. And so, you know, the market is, we don't have control over that kind of a market. The legislature didn't give us that responsibility. I'm not going to say authority, but it really is more of a responsibility. But I will say that we're, excuse me, we're working very closely with the Economic Development Department to try to figure out ways that we can try to help minimize any of that. We have monthly Invest in New Mexico workshops where entrepreneurs can come on. In fact, we just had one yesterday, and I believe that's the fourth one.
The fourth one, I attended the first two.
Yeah, excellent. And so we're trying to bring, like yesterday, I listened to the Tax and Revenue Department talk about, you know, taxation. So we're bringing on angel investors. We're bringing on a representative from the small business development, you know, centers. They can't get involved because of their federal money connection. But one of their board members, Debbie, who is actually, I believe she's the chair of their board, and then is also the head of the Chamber Association of Executive Directors here in New Mexico. Incredibly brilliant woman. And she's been on. So we're doing a lot of things to try to manage those expectations and manage how people plan for and then ultimately invest in a business here in New Mexico. Same thing that we would do if we were licensing restaurants. We want people to have all the information they need to ensure that they're making responsible decisions. And I tell people, you know, what brought me to New Mexico was economic development. I worked for a small company, Axion New Mexico. I believe they're called Dream Spring now. And I was there for 3 years traveling around the state. We've got an incredible pool of really creative entrepreneurs here in New Mexico. But entrepreneurs know that you have to have a business plan. Like a business plan is the first thing that you have to have. Where are you going to get the money? Where are you going to be able to do it? Is there a market? Who's going to help you with advertising? You can have a great product, but if you don't advertise it, who's going to help you with accounting? So all of those things are part of your business plan. Are you going to be able to survive without a year of income? Because starting a new business means that you probably won't have any personal income for up to a year, in some cases too. So can you kind of work through that? And what are you going to do in the meantime? So we're doing a lot of different activities to try to ensure that entrepreneurs have those resources.
Yeah, yes, and thank you for that too, because I was very impressed with those, and they were well attended. I think there were hundreds of people. So no, I think that is a wonderful resource that you're offering, because, and especially in the cannabis industry, I think you know, the cannabis industry has felt ignored, and the public resources aren't as available. So it's really enlightening that and refreshing to have them there. So yeah, thank you. I think that's good. So I think you pretty much answered the next question that was there, is that, so the plans are really let the market decide the cannabis. I mean,
To the extent
you don't have
that
the
we can help,
responsibility.
yeah, to the extent that we can help prepare people, that's our goal. I said from the beginning, when we first started doing these kind of online workshops, that one of my biggest fears was that people would invest their retirement, they would invest their family savings, they would invest in something that they hadn't really planned for, and that they would ultimately be harmed by that. And so that's really been a driving force for me, is to make sure that those kinds of mistakes are few and far between, and that people have all of the information they need to really make good decisions about investing in this business.
Good, it's very good. Now, one question, I've got it in detail. A member asked specifically that licensed nonprofit producers, as you know, had to be New Mexico nonprofit corporations. But many of them, they weren't 501c3s because they can't be, because it's cannabis, they're not charitable organizations. And so the corporate form really formed no purpose. But then, so as workarounds, these management companies were created, and then the management companies have been sold. I mean, that's what's been sold. So many, and I have clients too that are licensed nonprofit, and they want to, and this is what this other member asked, but that they would like to transfer to a different entity, so become a LLC or thing, but then maintain their vertically integrated license. Will that be a problem?
So, so let me tell you, the steps towards that have been outside of what we do, right? Because we license businesses and professions, but in regards to that nonprofit, I've learned all of those things that you just mentioned, that under DOH, they had to be a nonprofit. I've read the Secretary of State's, she got an opinion from the Attorney General's office that there wasn't really legal mandates in the Lynn Air and Compassionate Use Act to require that. How the decision was made, I really don't know all the background there, but there was some language in the original CRA when it went before the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And the comments in the Senate were that, in that committee, specifically were, this is outside of the scope of this act. This is nonprofit law. This is contract law. This is a number of other laws. And to be honest with you, we just didn't know enough about nonprofit law in order to, and we couldn't find anybody literally at midnight on the spur of the moment. And so what the legislators decided was, let's pull that out because we can't get enough information about it. So that language allowing a nonprofit to transfer into a for-profit type business was stripped from the bill. Now, we've heard that there may need to be some legislative fix for that. I am not pursuing that because we don't have any resources here internally who have that expertise, but we're open for that conversation. We don't take a position. You do not have to be a nonprofit in order to be licensed by us. If you change to a different business model, so long as you're not selling your business, we don't have a position on that one way or the other.
Okay, so it would be acceptable for a licensed nonprofit to be the same entity, just instead of a nonprofit, it's a New Mexico corporate or a New Mexico LLC.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, because was a mystery.
Yeah. That's
And then,
complicated law. Nonprofit
yes.
law is very complicated law.
Yes. Yeah, I was thrown into it representing licensed nonprofit producers. It was all, huh? And then it was because so many people hear nonprofit, they think 501c3, they think charitable organization, tax exempt. No. and that
other step.
Yeah, exactly. The next question is, how does the Regulation and Licensing Department address the concerns and complaints that have received media attention about the validity of a single licensed nonprofit producer license being issued by the DOH exclusively to one person days before their authority was transferred to the Regulation and Licensing Department? But no one else had an opportunity to apply. No one else had any notice of it. And then it was still immediately renewed and for fully vertically integrated establishment. There's a lot of concern about that, and it doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I hear the concern, but let me kind of put it into perspective. We literally didn't take authority for that program until June 29th. Anything that happened before that, we have simply tried to honor. So for example, applicants who had submitted applications to Department of Health for, I don't know, various things, an expansion of their current license, and had paid a fee for that, we've tried to honor that. We feel like that's our responsibility as a state. We can't compartmentalize ourselves and say, well, you submitted that to the Department of Health. We're not going, you're going to have to submit it to us now. We've tried really hard to honor those things that were submitted. Decisions that were made, though, in regards to licensing were not within our responsibility. We did not take any part in that. However, once it came to us on June 29th, then our responsibility under, and I was looking for it really quickly before we got onto this call, but I can't find it in the act, but there is a portion of the bill that required us to give a license of similar type to anyone who was licensed under Department of Health. Those are what we call legacy. The bill doesn't refer to them as legacy, but the bill requires us to give a similar license to anyone who was licensed by Department of Health. So one of the first things we were, and this was happening simultaneously while we're trying to do the rules and create a producer application. We were also having to renew those LNPPs because their licenses were set to expire on July 31st. And we were hearing from them that their insurance companies were not going to cover them, that they were going to be, their businesses were in jeopardy for a number of reasons. And so we made it a priority. We had like a subgroup of employees who were working on how do we renew these licensees and how do we get them that confirmation? Because remember, at the same time we're trying to figure out how to renew them, we were out for public comment on plant count. And we knew that plant count was going to change. And we also knew that the fee for the plants was going to not be set until those rules were final. So what we did is we processed their applications without any increase in plant count beyond what the Department of Health rules allowed, which I'm trying to remember, I think was up to 2,000.
1750, I think.
Yeah, so you had 1750 and then you could do an extra 500 and you could do an extra 500 at one other time throughout the year. So we made the decision that we were going to allow them to do those 2 500 increases at that time of renewal. And so we processed those renewals. We didn't bill them. We didn't bill them for plant count. And we gave them what we considered to be a provisional license, that once the rules were finalized, they could tell us exactly how much plant count they were going to have. And then we would process that, bill them, they would pay it, and their licenses would be completely renewed. But the provisional at least gave them some sense of security that their businesses were not going to be in jeopardy. So we were doing that simultaneously to creating this whole other platform for new producers. And it was important to us because the public saw it as in the statute that those legacy operators were getting a little bit of a head start. It was really important to us that they not get that head start, that everybody be on equal platform. And that's why we got that application process up and running simultaneously to getting them renewed conditionally, and then started the process of increasing their plant counts on September 1 when those applications were available. So this licensee that got licensed by the Department of Health, not the Regulation and Licensing Department, came to us as a legacy license. And it was our responsibility under the statute to give legacy licenses. We didn't have any ability to say to those licensees, well, when were you licensed? Or that was not within our purview. So we had to renew everybody who was licensed under Department of Health, and that was what we did.
Is there an investigation into that under any agency?
Not by our agency. We didn't, again, we didn't do that. We didn't issue that license. Any license issued by Department of Health was recognized by the Regulation Licensing Department and moved forward. I don't know how they made those decisions, Tricia. I really don't.
It's, you know, I mean, because there were no licenses issued except 2015, and it was open for 120 days and then closed, and then nothing for producers. So it's very suspicious, and I don't know.
What we have tried to do with the legacy licenses, because we didn't feel like we had, under the statute, it seemed as though we didn't have authority to make them meet certain standards. Our responsibility was to just issue them another license. So what we're doing now is we did that, what we were required to do, which is to issue a similar type license. And now we're building up a process for how we're going to go out and do inspections to ensure compliance with the statute and with the rules. And we're going to do the same thing for new licensees. They can certify that they've got all the information. We're going to verify, but we're not going to require an inspection before we go out and give them a license. We'll issue the license and then we'll do compliance inspections thereafter.
So there won't be an inspections before you issue licenses.
That's not our position at this point. And we don't intend to do an inspection before issuing the license. But remember that in that license application, the applicant is certifying that they're going to follow the security requirements. They certify that they're going to follow the transportation. They certify under penalty of law that they're going to adhere to those things. And so we're going to take their word on that. And then, you know, once we have the staffing and we're coming up with a checklist right now as to what we're going to review when we're out in the field, we'll go out and do inspections. And, you know, our goal would be to have inspections at least on an annual basis for producer and manufacturer licenses.
Random sampling or 100%? Random?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the goal would be to try to get each licensee inspected at least once a year. It's all going to depend upon how much staffing we have available. If we don't have enough staffing to do that, we'll do random, similar to what we do to barbers and cosmetology or massage massage therapists and the other types of inspections that we do.
That's why I think it makes so much sense that the Cannabis Control Division is under the Regulation Licensing Department instead of the Department of Health. I liked the Department of Health, but it wasn't their gig, you know, where it is yours. So it makes a lot more sense to have it under there. One question I wanted to ask, and it's kind of backtracking to licenses issued, is the budget. The budget had a minimal number of licenses. You know, that when I saw it, oh my gosh, you know, there are only 15 cannabis micro business. Is this a true projection of how few licenses?
Well, based upon the 85 that have been turned in so far and the, you know, potential of one person who might have a completed application, other states have not had projections. We based our projections upon what we knew other states were doing. Now, is that going to grow? I think that's absolutely going to grow. Is it going to grow overnight? Probably not, because the business is it's not as easy as opening up a shop and making it happen. You've got to have security measures. We do think that it's going to take some time for the industry to open up and to begin functioning. We also think that the retail establishments are probably going to be the bigger license types. So yeah, I think our projections are reasonable. I don't know if they're actual, but I think they are reasonable, and we revisit them. In fact, we're in the process of revisiting our budget as we speak, because we go and present our budget to the LFC on the 25th, I think, of this month. And so we're trying to make sure that our projections are as accurate and as close as possible. But if you think about, you know, the over 1,500 who started an application versus the 85 who have actually submitted, and the one who may actually have a completed application. And this is October 13th, which is almost a month and a half, you know, working towards 2 months since we've had those applications available.
That's right.
It's not going to be overnight.
No, not versus 1,500 that has completed it. Completely different. It's not as out of whack when you look at that. The next questions that I had submitted, and some municipalities really close have issued zoning ordinances literally banning cannabis businesses, including production, manufacturing, retail. That's against the Cannabis Regulation Act, CRA, right?
So we're not taking a position on that because it's outside of our authority. The statute gives local jurisdictions authority to create some zoning requirements for proximity to schools and childcare centers. I've presented at least once, and in some cases twice, to the Association of Counties and the Municipal League. I continue to work very closely with the leadership there. AJ Fort and I have done a number of presentations. So we continue to meet with local jurisdictions. We've had web meetings with Santa Fe a couple of times. We've met with Rio Rancho a couple of times. We've met with Las Cruces a couple of times. I've called local general councils for smaller communities and had conversations with them, answering their questions, providing them information. But how they come up with their zone, we can't give them legal guidance. We give them some guidelines. One of the guidelines that we've suggested is don't treat this type of business any different than you would any other type of business, with the caveat that we do treat alcohol businesses slightly different than we treat a dollar store. And so there's case law about proximity to schools under the Alcohol Control Act. And in fact, there's case law in Santa Fe, and it was a direct result of a time when I served on the school board, and we were trying to stop a store on Airport Road from selling alcohol directly across the street from Sweeney Elementary. And so there's good case law out there about how the courts view proximity and alcohol. So we've suggested to look at that case law and make your decisions based upon that. Ultimately, you know, there's going to be some case law around this,
Right.
but it won't be the department. And, you know, we've talked about, do we submit, you know, a friend of the court? Do we join in it? And honestly, we don't have the resources to do that. And so this is going to be the industry that's going to have to kind of figure out those things.
Yeah, it was, I was real disappointed to see that. Come on, because that's what I thought. There's just gonna have to be a lawsuit filed then. And it's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. And, you know, my advice has been, you don't want to be the one. You don't want to be the jurisdiction that has to fight the lawsuit for the state.
That's right. Actually, the last question and is a long one from a board member. He's actually a PhD, but and I think I can answer the question almost, because I think, you know, even with every application, you have to submit the social and economic equity plan, and I know the goals of that. So I'll let you answer it, but I think you're a good place. But I'm going to go ahead and read his question. He said, "You've stated previously that the department is committed to setting up a program, quote, in ways that support businesses, consumers, and communities For people of color, social equity in New Mexico's cannabis industry will require recognizing that racial disparities exist. In fact, social and economic equity was incorporated as a division mandate pursuant to the signing of the Cannabis Regulation Act by the governor. Can you provide examples of how you and your agency will do all in its power to become truly equitable, a word that encompasses universal participation in economic vitality and equal access to social, political, and economic opportunity, no matter what race, creed, or color? So
That was a really important question, and it is a really important subject, one that we don't take lightly. We did take a lot of criticism for the first round of rules for producers that we drafted because we weren't addressing that social equity. What we have, where we stand is we believe that this is not just social, but it's social and economic equity. And so we're looking at it from that perspective. When we look at social justice, it's those two things. They have to be part of each other. And so we added in some language about a social justice plan in our second round of rules, just as a placeholder, literally just as a placeholder, because the responsibility for helping us to move that forward truly lies with the CRAC committee. And so one of the first things that we asked that committee to do and to move forward on, and that's why hearing and listening to those committees is so valuable. We asked them to move on a social equity program. And so they've been meeting and they've been talking about it at each of their meetings. They'll give another update tomorrow because there's a meeting tomorrow. And there's on the agenda is an update on their social equity. So we're working on not just kind of, because the statute had a broad definition of what that meant, but you really have to narrow it down and figure out how do you identify those individuals and how do you provide them services to ensure that they can get access to the industry, whether it's a license ownership, whether it's business development, or whether it's being an employee in the industry. Each one of those things are an important aspect to ensuring that equity. We're also looking at, I don't have anything to announce today, but for sure, I'll be attending interim committee for the legislature with the Finance Authority tomorrow. And we're going to be introducing the Finance Authority has some draft rules, potentially to have a cannabis, have some access to funding. Now,
oh, how exciting.
I think that's a really important legislative meeting, and hopefully we'll have some announcements shortly thereafter, but I can tell you that I'm scheduled to be there with Marquita Russell, who is the Executive Director for the Finance Authority, to discuss the possibility of some funding for cannabis micro producers and integrated micro establishments, micro businesses.
Well, that is fabulous news. What a great note to end on.
Yes.
That is really great news, because that is honestly the big challenge. Well, as you know, with your work for entrepreneurs, I mean, that's the huge challenge.
Right.
They've got great idea, they've got great plan, but capital, money,
Yes.
money, money.
That is exactly right. And that was the one thing that we saw over and over and over again. We heard from current licensees, we heard from those who are interested in the business, there is no access to capital. And right. I think I shared with you at the beginning of this podcast that what brought me to New Mexico was working in providing funding for entrepreneurs, micro funding for entrepreneurs. Yes. And I've carried that with me. I really truly believe that there's two keys for folks who want to make a difference in their life and their families' lives. And one is education. And my path was education. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, and I've got a law degree. That was the key to my change for my family. The other key is access to capital for business. And you can put the two of those together and you can be successful, or you can have each one of those keys independently. And so we're working on trying to make sure that that access to capital is a reality here in New Mexico.
Well, that's refreshing, and then thank you. That's excellent, because I agree completely with you. I was a banker for 10 years before I went to law school 25 years ago, and that was a small business study. That's exactly. I
Yep.
mean, I agree with you and support you completely. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for all you're doing, because really you've done a phenomenal job, and it's going great. And however we, the the cannabis law section, can help, we want to participate too, because.
No, I appreciate that. I have to tell you just a small story, Tricia. This last weekend, my granddaughter, who's 14, was getting her hair braided. She was getting these purple extensions put in. And so the lady who braided her hair came over to our house, and my grandkids and my daughter came over, and we were sitting there having a conversation. And out of the blue, my daughter says, "Hey, by the way, did you know my mom is like really, really cool?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like, where's this going?" Right? And the lady who was braiding her hair was like, "Well, no, tell me what's going on." She says, "My mom is implementing the cannabis industry in New Mexico." So at the very least, it's making me the cool mom and ultimately the cool nana.
Well, again, thank you. So we all appreciate you.
Thank you, Tricia. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Member Services Department in the Cannabis Law section. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Kevin McLeod at Incomtech. The views of the presenters are that of their own and not endorsed by the State Bar